Morning, everybody, and thank you all for waiting for us to start this webinar this morning. I'm very excited to have Robert Kennedy here this morning and also Jake Gingerich from Beyond Pricing to talk about dynamic pricing. So airlines and hotels have obviously used dynamic pricing as a revenue management tool for decades, and the self-catering industry is really only just following suit in the last few years. With COVID-19 and the changing travel landscape, self-caterers need to invest in a dynamic pricing engine now more than ever before. Products like Beyond Pricing help self-caterers automate pricing variables such as seasonality, days of the week, and local events to ensure that an optimization of average daily rates and occupancies. In this session, SuperControl and Beyond Pricing will highlight Scotland-specific self-catering data and provide insight on how to maximize revenue with a dynamic pricing solution. I'm delighted to introduce Jake Gingerich, Beyond Pricing's team lead for the European markets. Jake helps self-caterers, including me, with 1 to 2,000 properties use Beyond Pricing to maximize their yield. Closely working with SuperControl and their customers, Jake is well informed on the Scottish markets and the unique challenges people face as an owner or agency. This session is going to be chaired by Robert Kennedy, Product Director at SuperControl and also Chair of the Association of Self-Caterers. Robert, I'd like to ask you to kick this session off, please.
Good morning, everyone. Good morning, Fiona and Jake and everyone on the call. Thank you very much for this opportunity, Fiona. It is fantastic to have this chance to speak to the SSC members, especially at this time and on a topic which is so important at the moment. I noticed the lovely Tunnocks banner behind you. The sessions have been kindly sponsored by Tunnocks. I haven't
see what's on my desk.
Yeah, it doesn't work. Why can't we get them virtually? So beyond pricing or dynamic pricing generally is a really big topic in our industry. It has been widely adopted in other markets, particularly in the US over the last few years, and it's coming to the UK and Europe. The way I see this is it's going to become an essential part of what we all do. Jake will describe the concepts behind Beyond Pricing, how it works and how dynamic pricing generally works, but it's very clear that a computer can do a significantly better job than most of us can as operators. With our own self-catering business in southwest of Scotland, we moved on to Beyond Pricing in October of last year, and I can really just draw on my personal experience here. It has made a significant improvement to our revenue. We're getting more bookings at higher value and have been before and after the COVID period, particularly now when prices, when the situation is still very in flux, supply and demand is moving about a lot, and it's really important to get your pricing right, and to achieve that manually is a massive overhead. So without delay, I'm going to hand you over to Jake, who's going to take you through the session. There is a quick Q&A button at the bottom of your screen. If you do any, hopefully we will answer all your questions through the call, but if you do have any questions, then please do ask them in there, and we'll either try and answer them during the session or we will answer them at the end. Myself and one of the Beyond Pricing team is also in the call to try and answer them during the call, as in by typing answers back to you if we can. So Jake, I will hand over to you if you want to share your screen and get the presentation up, and take it away.
Yeah, thank you, Robert. I'll share that now. All right, that main title screen showing up on your end, Robert?
That's perfect, yes.
All right. Awesome. Well, before I get started, wanted to thank you, Robert, for the great intro, and Fiona as well. Thanks for inviting us to talk about dynamic pricing. I'm the team lead for European markets at Beyond Pricing. I spent quite a while at our home headquarters office in San Francisco, working with U.S. property managers in U.S. markets. And for the past year and a half, have been focused on leading our efforts in Europe and working on our partnership specifically with SuperControl. So over the past really year or 9 months, I've worked with many SuperControl clients, Scottish property managers and self-caterers to really just help you optimize your rates. So excited to be here. Thanks everybody for joining, and I'll get started with just a quick agenda. So first off is just introductions. We'll go into who is Beyond Pricing, in case you don't know about us, kind of who we are, who we work with, what is dynamic pricing, and then jumping into why it's needed for ASSC members. I think there's a case for dynamic pricing all the time, but there are specific things happening in the market right now that people with dynamic pricing are able to take advantage of. And if you're not, you might be leaving money on the table or making your job just a little bit harder than it needs to be. Then we'll go into how to get started, right? What you need to get going in order to start dynamically pricing your homes. And we'll also go into how Beyond Pricing can help with that. We'll take a look at Robert's account with Beyond Pricing, quickly show you how to set up the system, how it works, and some stats around how his properties are performing. And then finishing up, we'll have the main Q&A at the end, but from working with so many of you already, I know a lot of these common questions that come around managing profitability, managing guests and owners and competition. So I've got a few common questions that I'd like to run through there. Just I know that that'll help a few people out, and then finish it up with answering any questions that you guys have. So I'll go ahead and get started. So Beyond Pricing, we were the world's first dynamic pricing engine for short-term rentals. We were founded in 2013 by experts, and what I mean by that is one of our co-founders wrote the pricing algorithm for intercontinental hotels, Hawaiian Airlines, Aeromexico, just a ton of experience doing the exact same thing, but for another industry. And our other co-founder, David, our current CEO, has been building software in Silicon Valley for many, many years. So that's where we started, was in San Francisco. Today we have offices in San Francisco, as well as London, Lisbon, Barcelona, Australia. We've got a team of about 70 people. And because of that global presence, we have 24/7 support, and you're always able to reach somebody from our team. And when Beyond Pricing started back in 2013, our first integration and the first people we started working with were individual homeowners or self-caterers that was just managing one listing on Airbnb. Then we began to build integrations with PMS systems, so we could start working with self-caterers and property managers that had a direct website, right, that had all these different channels that they were pulling revenue from. And since then, right, today we're working with well over 500 agencies around the globe. We work with thousands of owners and help price around 250,000 listings worldwide. So SuperControl, our partnership with them started in 2019, essentially right before Robert started using the platform in October. And I think Robert was probably then our first partner on SuperControl. So that's a little bit about us. And as Robert was saying, right, dynamic pricing, airlines that have been doing it for many years, hotels, golf courses, and it's really like an essential part of their business. Hotels, right, they have something like a property management system, but all hotels, right, all airlines, they use a pricing tool to help set their prices. They're not going in there and setting those up manually or creating their own rules. They're all using data to do that. And we're essentially that software, but for vacation rentals. So dynamic pricing, what is it? I always like to look to Oxford Dictionary, right? The practice of varying the price for a product or service to reflect changing market conditions. In particular, the charging of a higher price at a time of greater demand. So not too fancy, nothing too complicated. Most people are actually already doing it. If you charge a high rate for your peak and holiday times, a slightly lower rate for your mid-season, and an even lower rate for low season, right? You're already capitalizing on some of these fluctuations in demand, right? You know you can charge more during the holidays or during your high season because there's more demand. So you can charge a higher rate and still achieve good occupancy. So those basically laws, right, or that force that's allowing you to charge more in high season is the same reason you can charge more for any period of time where there's a higher level of demand. And to visualize that, this graph is a visualization of one flat rate, which is the red line going across the screen at about 80 pounds. Imagine that's a manager who just got started with their self-catering, right? They just launched their property. They looked at some competitors and said, okay, they're, pricing it around 90 pounds, so I'll start with 80. So you may go a few months with just a flat rate, and then after you get some experience, right, from looking at your data or just knowing the market, right? You don't need to be a rocket scientist to figure out that there's more demand in August, right? How many phone calls are you getting? How many bookings, right? It's when you're the busiest. So then people move to setting different seasons. So this is just an example, but in general, kind of what a seasonal pricing strategy looks like in Scotland and throughout the UK, where you have a kind of base price here in September through October, and then people increase their prices maybe 20, 30% for October half term, and then decreasing below that for November through December until you spike your prices up again here for Christmas and New Year's. Then there's kind of that low season after Christmas and New Year's. So you see prices below that 80-pound mark, increasing again here for Easter, staying up a little bit higher after Easter than you would for after Christmas or New Year's, increasing again here for that spring bank holiday, and then kind of stair-stepping up into your high season in the summer. So when you look at that compared to a flat rate, that shaded region in blue, that's the extra revenue you receive or you make by fluctuating your rates when there's higher or less demand, right? Up here, you're gaining extra revenue because you're charging a higher rate, and below that, you're getting more occupancy and netting a higher rate or higher booking revenue at the end of the month. But in reality, right, there are fluctuations in demand happening all the time, from day of week fluctuations, seasonality, events, holidays, festivals. All of those three things can change dates every year. So demand is changing all the time, from travel patterns, changes in the landscape like COVID. Obviously, that's an extreme example. But when you look at kind of a daily pricing, what that looks like when compared to a seasonal rate strategy, that's what you see here. So we took our sample pricing from RCAR, and that's what the blue line is. Sorry if I butchered that name, Fiona. Okay, the blue line, that's the supply or the daily rate set by supply and demand, and the red line, that's your seasonal rate strategy or general seasonal rate strategy. So you can see the same increases here for half term, Christmas and New Year's, right? Easter, spring bank holiday. And when you compare that to our rates, you can see that in general, right, seasonality is about the same. In general, our rates are increasing and decreasing when people with seasonal rate structures are. We're just going up and down for different week and weekdays, and going higher or lower than the seasonal rate structure at times. And sometimes, right, when you compare your rates to dynamic rates and you use supply and demand to see what's left on the table, you might see that you're already increasing for something like Christmas, Easter, Spring Bank holiday. These are events and holidays that are pretty well known. The first ones people usually increase for, but you could be leaving 10 to 30% on the table. And that's what dynamic pricing can help with, is not only finding new fluctuations that you might not know about, but also just, you know, these really obvious ones like Christmas. Hey, I'm increasing my price 50%, but you could be doubling your price. So sometimes we help, and dynamic pricing helps with making sure you're getting enough out of the fluctuations you're already making. Sometimes you might not be adjusting for demand at all when there's either an event or holiday or something new that's happening that you didn't know about. And at those times, you might leave 10 to 40% on the table. Something like St. Andrew's Day or February half term, the early May bank holiday. Those would be events or holidays that bring demand that are a little less known, or there's at least less people taking advantage of that higher demand. And sometimes, you know, without data, people leave money on the table for a specific season. So something like high season is, you know, when I talk to people about their goals or what they think they need to work on with their pricing strategy, almost everyone is high season. We don't need to look at that. You know, it's totally a non-issue, and totally agree. It's not a super challenging time, but when it's easy to get bookings, when you're always occupied, usually you're not focusing on that time to see, hey, is there more revenue that I can get out of the season? Am I really pricing high enough? And that's what we can kind of really help with, is analyzing your pricing for a given year and really figuring out where fluctuations that you're not picking up on, where can you increase in places that you already are, and maybe spot out a season where you're just generally overpriced or generally underpriced. And there's a lot of advantages of doing that. And it's not price gouging, right? You're not selling like PPE that's been sitting on the shelf and all of a sudden there's this big need for masks, and now we're, you know, quadrupling our price and making a profit on like inventory like that. It's really about a market equilibrium. When you're using supply and demand, balancing that, right? Economics 101, that's when you reach market equilibrium and revenue is maximized. And it's a give and take, right? Something like Valentine's Day at a pub, they would double the price of their beer. And, you know, it's not necessarily because the beer on that day is twice as nice as it is on any other day. It's the same keg, it's the same tap. But when there's a lot of demand, as a business, you have to capitalize on that. And the sales they make that day, they pay for a lot more than just what's sold and the work that goes into that day. So you got to use times like that to increase the price and kind of let the market tell you what that price should be and what they're willing to pay to stay with you. On the other side, it's also about happy hour. Lowering prices brings business when there otherwise wouldn't be. It makes things affordable for people. So dynamic pricing, it's not an extreme one or the other. It's not about setting extremely high rates and price gouging. It's not about dropping rates either. It's not about lowering prices to the floor to make sure you have 100% occupancy. It's about maximizing revenue and letting that market decide the price. Because if you don't, you'll never kind of know what you're leaving on the table. You have to let the market do that. So why it's needed for ASSC, I thought I'd start with a real life example, something that's happening right now throughout Scotland that I think a lot of you on the call today probably have already experienced. And that's what's happened really in September and October of this year. So we're looking at this is a neighborhood in Duns in Scottish Borders. And this is sample data of people not using dynamic rates. So over here on the left is an occupancy graph, and the black line is occupancy looking out into the future, with occupancy on the y-axis, the dates here at the x-axis. So the black line is forward-looking demand on the group of properties that we're analyzing, and the blue line is historical occupancy on that same group of properties. And we can see how occupancy in September is already much higher than what we ended with last year. Same with October. And it's only, September 8th, we're only at the beginning of the month. So occupancy is pacing way faster than last year. And when you think about it, it's a lot closer to what July and August looks like than really what September and October looked like last year. Working with a lot of you guys, I know that that's kind of extended that high season into September, which is amazing, especially after a long drought of bookings and everything that happened. But it's also creating a lot of work, right? It's a lot of bookings, it's a lot of check-ins, it's a lot of cleanings. So all this extra demand that was pent up from the lockdown is now booking throughout the fall. But when we look at ADRs over here on the right, the blue line or the blue bars in the bar graph, those are the ADRs for each of these months booked before March 20th. And then the green line are the average ADRs in each of these months booked after March 20th. So essentially, pre-COVID and post-COVID. And we see our highest rates charged here in August in general. And then we see our lower rates charged here in September, October, and November. And in a normal year, right, that would make sense with demand in July and August being much higher, September and October much lower. But what we can see by analyzing this is people aren't like increasing their prices because there's this higher demand. We see that ADRs are relatively the same. There aren't a ton of people reacting and increasing their prices because of the higher demand. Even without that, right, even if you don't go in and increase prices because there's more demand, it's still a gift, right? You're still ending up with a lot more revenue that you made last year. With September, October, July and August, right, pacing well above last year, you still see the benefits of that extra demand. But when we look at things a little bit more closely, if we look at June and July, at this kind of sample cross-section of listings, the market, right, already saw a 20% increase versus 2019 for January and February. And then July and August also saw about a 25% increase. So as we came out of that lockdown, basically that first week of July, we're definitely pacing July and August a lot stronger versus last year, and a little bit stronger than January and February. This blue line is showing you 2020 revenue, and the green lines are 2019. Dark green being the final revenue for 2019, and the light green would be pacing, or essentially where were we at this time last year. So when we look at July and August, we see, okay, we're pacing well, but it's pretty similar to what happened in January and February. So in terms of like a recovery, in terms of recouping some of that lost revenue and using this demand in our favor, September and October is where that real recovery is happening. September and October is where revenue, occupancy, right, all of that is on pace to more than double last year. But when people aren't essentially using that higher demand to set rates, when we take that extra revenue from September and October that we've gotten, when that demand shifted, it helps with filling back March and April, right? We're starting to backfill some of that lost revenue, but we're still left with May and June kind of sitting empty. When we think about taking that pent up demand that moved over to the fall, it's not filling up what we lost. And occupancy is kind of already at unseen levels. And that's kind of the cost of being reactive versus proactive. because the occupancy is already high, right? There's probably not a ton left on people's calendars. The demand is high, but you never really know how much demand is left, especially when it's something like a bounce back from COVID. So in hindsight, right, how this looks with dynamic pricing is with access to historical and forward-looking demand data, you see this right away, right? You see September and October, July and August really start to book up faster than it did last year. You see that in your own bookings, you see that in market data, and because your prices are tied to supply and demand, they're raised. If that's with Beyond Pricing, that can happen automatically. If you're looking at your own data sources, you're going in and increasing those prices. So the result, right, is not only do you benefit from that demand moving over to the fall, so you can get those extra bookings, but you're also charging a higher price because there is more demand. So that recovery happens faster and you're building a stronger business because of it. And those higher prices, right, it really makes sense, especially right now. I know I've talked to a lot of you and it feels a lot like high season. Phones are ringing off the hook. There's check-ins and checkouts all the time, plus the new cleaning regulations, right? And like your team, right, and you and in dealing with that, right, you deserve to charge those higher prices, and that's one of the reasons for it. And with people essentially so much demand for fall, there aren't as many properties available, just like in high season, and that's when you're able to charge a higher price. So that's just like one real world example that I saw kind of happening right now. And many of our partners in Scotland, right, some of them have onboarded at the beginning of July, and we have some really interesting case studies that we can share. But we have booked entire weeks in short breaks at rates 10 to 120% higher than what they were previously advertising. So it's always kind of pays to know what those fluctuations in demand are. And it's happening really across Scotland. Cairngorms National Park, Argyll, Aberdeen, right? You can see that black line, which is this year's occupancy as it stands today, over that blue line, which is historical occupancy. We're pacing way above that versus last year. And coming from someone who spends all day looking at market data charts, this is not normal. This is pretty wild to see a market booking up way faster than last year, as far out as December. And it's something that, as an operator, it's changing your seasons, right? It's changing your work calendar. And I want to stay positive, but this demand is shifting. We saw the early summer bookings kind of flow into fall. So at some point, is demand going to fall less than last year? Or are we going to see staycations stay strong and you'll just have higher occupancy throughout the year moving forward? You kind of never really know. But that's why it's important to follow that data and really understand how you're performing and where your prices should sit. And right, it's not just a fad. COVID is a prime example and kind of easy to display just because the numbers are so big and everyone's felt it. But demand's always fluctuating. There was Brexit, and events and holidays are changing dates. Different things become popular. So things are always happening, and whether it's because demand is skyrocketing or demand is plummeting, right? You benefit the more you know about your market and the more that's happening on the ground. So the second piece of why I think it's the necessity for ASSC members. The first is just like reinvestment into your business. Competition. Some of you that may be what keeps you up at night is either a large player or a competitor property down the street, or maybe your competition is yourself. I think self-caterers across the UK and especially Scotland, right? The guest experience, the brand, it's super important, right? That's why self-caterers and property managers do what they do. From the people I've gotten to know over the years is hospitality, the guest experience, and providing something great. So, using dynamic pricing to maximize revenue, right? It allows you to reinvest that back into the guest experience, grow your business. For someone with, 10 million pounds in revenue, we work for folks like that, and their goal might be to buy 10 more properties, or acquire a business, and we help them move that 10 million revenue to 12 million. For individual owners and small businesses, it could be netting an extra 1,000 or 2,000 pounds a month to buy a new appliance or new furniture that you might want to have for the property. The second would be future hardship. So COVID is an extreme example of a forced business stoppage, but that could happen in the future. Something like the cleaning protocols that have come along with COVID, right? These are things that make your business more expensive to run, and restrictive legislation. As things get harder to run your business, whether it be something unexpected or anything like that, right? Everything is going to be harder if you're leaving money on the table. So dynamic pricing, it helps you arm yourself with as much revenue as possible to run your business. And kind of tied with that is profitability. OTA fees, right? Those are increasing. If you are a self-caterer that posts to those, rising fixed costs for cleanings, whether it be new protocols, or just how much it costs to pay someone to clean a home, and also available talent to hire people to help you run your business. If that feels like it's getting harder, right, the less you, if you're leaving money on the table, right, if you're kind of going with the flow and not capitalizing on some of those things, right, over time, it makes sense why profitability will become harder and harder. And the fourth is really everyone wins. Whether you're an agency, charging 10 to 20% of the booking revenue with a portfolio, or you're an individual owner, or a guest, yes, guests, everyone wins. And when I talk about guests, obviously some folks, right, if you're increasing the price and they've been coming for a long time, they're not necessarily winning in that scenario. But if everyone in the market prices based on supply and demand, then it's basically a fair market, and it's easier for consumers to find what they want in terms of value for the price that they want. And in market equilibrium, right, that's where everything grows. Everything in your supply chain, right, we're increasing bookings, we're increasing occupancy, so the community wins as well. All right, so how to get started, how to go to A to Z in dynamic pricing. First step is find a reliable source for accurate data, whether it be scraping data, using data of competitors, going to Airbnb, Booking.com, Snaptrip, Holiday Lettings. You have to find that data and also record historical and forward-looking occupancy rates, booking windows, ADRs, and a few other KPIs that are important. Then you have to create an algorithm or model that formulates prices from that data. And then you have to implement those 365 daily rates into your PMS every single day. And you have to update those data sources, algorithm, and process as the world evolves. You got to get it right, or it's going to be a huge waste of time. And you also have to run your business during a pandemic. Very, very tough thing to do on your own. So that's why Beyond Pricing is here, right? That's why we exist. Actually maximizing revenue and setting the best prices every single day is really, really hard to do. No industry does it manually. So that's why we started. That's why SuperControl partnered with us, and that's why the ASSC invited us to present today. what we do exactly is we do automated dynamic pricing based on market and historical data. So each night we push 365 demand-driven prices for every single listing into SuperControl, direct to your channel, every single day. So the process of setting rates, right? You'll never have a time where you're spending the next 2 weeks kind of huddling up in your house and setting rates for the next year across your properties, or going out and figuring out, okay, what date is Easter on this year? You know, or is our holidays falling on a Friday or Saturday or Tuesday? We're automatically using that historical demand data and forward-looking demand data to automatically set those prices for you. And really, it's remarkably easy to do. There can be a learning curve. It can be uncomfortable setting different rates for some people. But once you kind of trust the system and let it do its thing, it's pretty insanely easy how easily you can have that sophisticated pricing strategy using Beyond Pricing, and basically get to that top level of efficiency and sophistication that your competitors might have. So our partnership with SuperControl, this allows us to take our market data, right, Beyond Pricing. You can kind of think of us as your central pricing engine. We're going out and pulling data from Airbnb, Booking.com, VRBO, Expedia, a few other private and public data sources. And our revenue management team creates different markets, clusters, and neighborhoods. And we'll go into exactly how that works in the demo. But Beyond Pricing, we collect the data, we automatically generate those prices. We've got a lot of automations to help with different rules and also performance dashboards to show you how your property is performing against the market. So we're that central engine. We're able to push all of those prices into SuperControl every day in about 20 minutes. So once those prices get into SuperControl, they do what they do best and get all of that information out to your channels. So to your direct website, Airbnb, SnapTrip, VRBO, all of those channels that you post to today. And things like your markups, fees and extras, your check-in, check-out days, minimum stay rules, all of that stays the same. And I know there's a lot of questions about, well, how does the fees work and the markups work? Virtually all of our customers do markups. They all have fees, and the language that Beyond Pricing speaks in is essentially rental amount. The same way in SuperControl, when you set up like a weekly price, you kind of speak in that rental amount, and then it increases the prices for your channels. And below here are just some of the ASSC and SuperControl users that are using Beyond Pricing today that took advantage of the partnership. And we'll hop into the demo to give you guys a closer look of how that actually looks. All right. So right now we're logged into Robert's account with Beyond Pricing. You can see he's got 3 properties connected right now. And to create your account with Beyond Pricing, it's as simple as going to our website, clicking sign up. And when you click, once your account's created, you'll have all the options here to connect your channel or your PMS system. SuperControl is quite easy. You just click on SuperControl and enter in your client key. There's a ton of helpful resources, both on our end and SuperControl's, to help you find that. But that's how you connect SuperControl. Our other PMS systems and our channel integrations can be found here as well. But once you connect your account, in about an hour or so, we will have synced, pulling in your historical data, as well as a few details around the property. So we won't have time to cover everything today, but at least wanted to give everyone a higher level overview of how the system worked, and how to set up a one listing. So Cutler's Cottage, or Cutler's Lodge, if I click onto that property, you're going to see a bunch of different tabs here at the top. And this chart view is going to look pretty familiar, right? This is that visualization of rates over the next year. In Robert's case, we're pushing rates out to 18 months. But over here on the left, that's today's date. Over here on the right is a year from now. And you can see all those different fluctuations in price throughout the year. By hovering your mouse, you can see exactly what we're charging for each day. And then backing out, you can easily visualize, when am I charging the highest, when am I charging the least. So there's two main levers when you're setting up a listing. You've got your base price and your minimum price. So the base price is the starting point for all price fluctuations. You only have one base price for the entire year. It's sort of like the average price or just like general value of the home. And that base price, it should be lined up with to where you're kind of happy with where we're going in terms of high season and as well as low season. And what we can't visualize here that we could when we were going through the slides is basically comparing our dynamic rates to a seasonal rate structure. And we can't do that because Robert already has his price syncing on. If you connect your account to Beyond Pricing, you'll be able to see our pricing compared to yours kind of overlaid on that screen, the same way that we walked through on the slides prior. So the base price, you can see in areas of high demand, we go way above that. Areas of low demand, we go way below it. And adjusting that base price affects every single day's rate. So at 155, you can see on December 31st, we're charging 288. And on February 12th, we're charging 194. Right, if I change this base price to 250, it takes that blue chart, right, and pulls it up so that we're charging this more than when the base price was at 150 for every single day. So as you can imagine, if you've got two bedroom cottages right next to each other, one has really nice furniture and amazing views. One, the furniture is a little bit old, still a beautiful place, but the furniture is not as nice, appliances, and doesn't have a view. Both properties, they have the same fluctuations in demand throughout the year. They're going to have the same high season, low season. You're still going to charge more on Christmas and New Year's and bank holidays. But that nicer property will just have a higher base price than the other one.
Jake,
so
I think that there's a couple of questions around this area, which I think it might be good to answer while you're in the demo here. So,
okay.
The first thing that from my experience, and you're looking at our account here, that is it. Our pricing involves changing those two numbers, and we do not need to worry about anything else. So we've tweaked that over time as we've got more accustomed to the system, and as obviously COVID has come in and given us greater opportunities. But there's no more hateful job of doing prices once or twice a year. This is all we need to worry about. So yeah, Jake, a few people are asking about, they feel they've got a unique property, their property's different, their property's got different amenities associated with it, and how that compares to the market. And I think what you're describing here in your example is that they're in charge of how they set that base price, how they value their property against the market. Beyond Pricing isn't doing that. That is absolutely in control of the owner or the agent who knows and understands the market and the property in the nuances of that. And here you can have two properties right next door to each other, as you said, with completely different base prices, just because you know that, you understand that. Mm. So yeah, sort of talking to uniqueness of properties, perhaps you could sort of talk around that, because there's 2 or 3 questions that have come through around that topic.
Yeah, great question. So as you said, the base price it's in full control of the user, and you usually set that base price looking at your historical bookings, right? And set a base price to where our prices are somewhat mirroring the prices that you've set in the past. So like how much we're charging on Christmas how high we're going for a bank holiday, that's really determined by the base price, which is set by the user. And then properties that are like really, really unique, usually those might carry like a higher base price than a property the similar size that's not unique, right? So the uniqueness and what makes it special is how you set a higher base price, right? It's what makes the property valuable. But really, really unique properties, right? Tree houses, right? Really, really like caves and tiki huts and all around the globe, right? There's very, very unique types of accommodation. And typically they all follow the same demand structure as listings around them. So there's certain there's certain like appliances or like a hot tub or a sauna, right, that might be more popular during a certain time of the year. And there's tools in the system to account for that, and that might be what goes into setting your base price. But the base price is completely set by the user, and that'll control every single day's rate. And that's something that you should check from time to time to see how your bookings are performing. So when we're setting that base price, if we have a bunch of historical data, we're not really looking at what does the property have, what does it not have. We're just looking at, hey, what did it book for last year in high season? And do we think we can price higher than that? And we're using that information to set the base price. When it comes to like competitors and specific aspects of the property that make it nicer, those things are super helpful when setting a base price when you have no historical data. And that's usually where pricing strategies start, right? Someone starts offering their property through the direct website or Airbnb. They're not really sure how to price, so they go out and look at how their unit compares to others just to get it into a price point where they think they'll be able to get a booking. But once you have a lot of that historical data, then you start to see how the market values your property. And when we have that historical bookings, that's where you can set a base price according to bookings you've already taken. Do you feel like that helped answer the question there, Robert, or?
Yeah, absolutely. It's this question's yes is the answer. You know, people. There's been a couple of other comments as well, which I was just typing replies to. The fact is that every single, that's the nature of our industry. Every single property is unique in one way or another. Its location or its amenities or. And you understand that. You understand the difference between your property, what you offer, and the one up the road. So you're in control of that. What Beyond Pricing is doing is using that supply and demand data, and it does an amazing job of it. You're looking at our account here. I am happy to say that we've been taking bookings at double the price of last year and consistently through. And we have not had issues from our guests. We still have very high value for money scores. People are paying the price that they're willing to pay for the property that they're getting at that moment in time, and it's absolutely works brilliantly.
Awesome. Well, yeah, and speaking of your stats, Robert, if you don't mind me showing kind of how you're comparing versus last year, we can look at average daily rates and see that, right, in October of last year, right, the ADR, or average daily rate, that's a really popular term at Beyond Pricing. Average daily rate is just the total revenue for the month divided by how many days were booked, right? And that just gives you the average daily rate for the month. So Robert, for October of this year, we booked at an average daily rate that's about 80% higher than what you booked at last year. September at about 40% increase versus last year. In July and August, with essentially like 20% or 30% higher than last year. I think that's where like dynamic pricing really helps is July and August, when we saw the data before, we are performing better than last year, as we should. But when we look at October and September, right? That's where demand has really changed from last year, and that's where our ADR should be different versus last year. And that's where you see those really high 40% and 80% higher ADRs, because we're using that data to help set Robert's prices. You can also see that maximum daily rates are all much higher than last year as well. And it's a really common concern with people starting off with dynamic pricing is they think it's about flooring rates in order to get bookings, and it's really about a balance of charging the highest rates we can, but still achieving good occupancy and getting the highest revenue possible for the month. So sometimes it can feel like we're extreme one way or the other, but it's really about a balance and maximizing revenue for each unit. So I know we've got about 9 minutes left. We've got full recorded demos of Beyond Pricing online. I'd be happy to go through a few more pieces of the platform here, or if Robert, we've got a few more questions. Figure we can jump into a few of those.
Yeah. So thanks, Jake. As you say, there's plenty of information online, and I know that your team are willing to go into any detail with anyone that wants to understand more. So a few questions. One of them is about how you define markets. I know that, for example, you have 100% coverage of Scotland. What does that mean? And for people who are in sparsely populated areas and are concerned that you're benchmarking against very few properties, can you explain how that isn't a cause for concern?
Yeah. So our the way that we launch markets, or the way we started, right, is at the beginning we only priced properties in San Francisco. Then we launched Santa Cruz, which is like a beach town south of San Francisco, and we've gone market by market, one at a time, to make sure that we get the market data right for that area. So our revenue management team, we have direct links to all of the major OTAs. We've got other private and public data sources, right? And they're creating that cluster of properties around your unit that we're using to see in the past, were they booked or not, and in the future, are they booked or not, to understand what that supply and demand data looks like. So a market is a really large area. Within markets, there are clusters, and those are a lot smaller. So, a market like London would have, 30 clusters, or there might be a market as large as that we call like Northumberland and Scottish Borders, right? It's a huge area, but we're not comparing properties in Scottish Borders with Northumberland Park or Northumberland Coast, right? We're creating those specific clusters that keep things hyper-local. And you also don't want to stay super small, right? Because at one, yes, we don't want to, be comparing ourselves against others that aren't comparable. But again, we're not using their rates to set our prices, right? If we're comparing a bunch of properties that aren't as nice, your property is not going to have lower prices. What we're trying to find out is, are people traveling? Are people booking up for this holiday? And right, so we do keep things hyper-local, and we have a revenue management team that creates those markets by hand. They monitor those and maintain them. And then you as a user, right, can always see how you compare to the market in terms of your occupancy. And that's really the best way to see, right, if you're overbooked or underbooked, if you should make a change to your pricing, right? And Robert here, right, is booked faster than the market, both over the next 30 and 90 days. Right, so we may suggest increasing your base price here. So all of these properties that we're comparing against, they could be nothing like Cutler's Lodge, but similar bedrooms within the vicinity. We can see that the market's booking up really fast, so we should be increasing our prices. So that supply and demand data is built by us, and we always work to get that right.
Yeah, and certainly my experience going back again was you sort of slightly confused as to how you're doing that at the start, because there's not a million properties nearby here, but I can tell you it works, really works effectively. just scrolling through, and for those of you who have answered questions that we haven't answered during the call, then we will try and get back to you as soon as we can with answers. I think we have answered most of them, though. Scrolling through many questions right now. I think actually we've covered a lot of these. I guess one topic that's been mentioned is about repeat guests. Certainly, one of our business downfalls was being booked up too early with repeat guests, so they were almost our enemy and not our friends, because they were returning so quickly. But there's a bit of concern about those repeat guests that have been coming for years. Suddenly, are they going to be asked to pay a lot more? From a SuperControl perspective, you can still control your prices that you offer. You can offer vouchers or discounts to guests that you want to, but maybe you could share some experience around repeat guests and any issues about them paying higher prices than they've been used to.
Right. Yeah, definitely. And I think everyone who uses Beyond Pricing when they first start out, everyone's going to have a different experience, right? Some of them may end up charging way higher prices than they have in the past. Other people, it might just be a few times of the year. So everyone will kind of have their own experience with that. And with repeat guests, right? They kind of have probably been staying with you for a long time, and raising your prices from year to year is pretty common. And most repeat guests, I think, will be okay with paying a higher rate. And you can always offer them like a 10% discount for any repeat guests. And that usually will keep them, right? But also you're part of this market where across Scotland, right? We saw across all these different markets today that everyone's occupancy is going up, right? There is a large market of people who want to stay in a Scottish self-catering property all over. So these repeat guests, right, letting them go if you have to isn't going to crush your business, right? You're going to be able to fill that gap. And I think, what I really respect about self-caterers throughout the UK and Scotland is a lot of you guys have built your business from the beginning, started with a direct website. Direct bookings has been like a focus of yours from the beginning, versus like a property manager in London that took 10 properties, put them on Airbnb, and boom, you have a business. So I know some of you have like started that business, and those repeat guests is what your business is built off of, and it's gotten you to this point. But if you see yourself booking up super far in advance, and the repeat guests keep taking up all of those bookings, right? That growth of your brand, like the same people staying with you every year, you're not able to increase your prices, or at least you're stopping not doing that because of the repeat guests, right? It's pros and cons, and you just have to balance that. But those like vouchers and codes that have in SuperControl, if we're charging 40% more than last year and they get a 10% discount on that, there's still ROI. You're still seeing higher returns, and hopefully that guest still feels like they have a great relationship and special deal from you.
Certainly, and in our experience, it's been a strange year, of course, but we have attracted different guests to our properties, as well as many of those people that have returned for many years. So I'm aware we're sort of getting to the end of the time now. So first of all, I want to thank you, Jake, for your time today and for generously sponsoring this session. The ASSC, normally we have our big conference at the end of October, and this year we're doing these talks, and it's fantastic to have the support, continued support of brands such as Beyond Pricing. So thank you for that. For everyone listening, we will be providing a link to the talk and video of this presentation within the ASSC website, and there's a link on the page now. As I said, we will try and get back to you, those of you who've asked questions. If you want to know more, just either contact us at SuperControl or contact Jake at Beyond Pricing. Again, we'll share the relevant contact details. So thank you very much, Jake. Really, really helpful, and I think it's a great introduction. Fiona, I don't know if you've got anything to close out on, particularly looking at the next talks coming up.
Well, yeah, I'd just like to say thank you so much, Jake. I had a long conversation with Jake a couple of weeks ago, and I have now signed up to Beyond Pricing for both of my properties. And I had similar concerns about how is this going to work? What should my base rate be? Jake's been incredibly helpful in explaining it all. I've had 3 bookings in the last 4 days, one of which is double what I would normally charge for a week's rent in one of my properties. They don't have a problem with it. I don't have a problem with it. I will then use that money to do something to improve the property. So in terms of revenue maximization, Beyond Pricing is definitely the way forwards. I'm already seeing it benefiting my own business. So thank you very much indeed, Jake. Thank you very much, Robert. As Robert's just said, next week we are looking at cleaning protocols, but not just cleaning, how to kind of use the opportunity around the cleaning protocols and what your compliance requirements are going forwards. But you know, how to make these annoyingly time-consuming things that we have to do now work to your best advantage. So that's what's happening next week. On the 29th of September, we are having a talk around the new regulation for short-term lets. If you don't know what the Scottish Government has planned in terms of our sector, you really need to get onto that call. It's potentially the biggest threat we've ever faced. So that's the 29th of September at 12 o'clock. But thank you all very much indeed for your time and for being here today. And I hope that's been really helpful. And as Robert said, if you have any other questions, please contact either Robert at SuperControl or Jake at Beyond Pricing. And otherwise, thank you very much indeed. Take care.
Awesome. Thanks, guys.